The first story is entitled Harry, written by Rosemary Timperley, a British author, not well known. It was published in 1955. Harry, by Rosemary Timperley.
Just turn the music off.
That's better.
It won't be on for the whole time. Such ordinary things make me afraid. Sunshine, sharp shadows on grass, white roses, children with red hair, and the name Harry. Such an ordinary name. Yet the first time I heard Christine mention the name, I felt a premonition of fear. She was 5 years old, due to start school in 3 months' time. It was a hot, beautiful day, and she was playing alone in the garden, as she often did. I saw her lying on her stomach in the grass, picking daisies and making daisy chains with laborious pleasure. The sun lit up her pale red hair and made her skin look very white. Her blue eyes were wide with concentration. Suddenly, she turned toward the bush of white roses, which cast its shadow over the grass. She smiled and said, "Yes, I'm Christine." She rose and walked slowly toward the bush. "With my mommy and daddy," she said, and then after a pause, "But they are my mommy and daddy." She was in the shadow of the bush now. It was as if she'd walked out of the world of light into darkness. I felt uneasy, without quite knowing why, and I called her. "Chris, what are you doing?" "Nothing. Come indoors now. It's too hot for you out there." "Not too hot. Come indoors, Chris." Looking towards the bush, she said, "I must go now. Goodbye." Then she turned and walked slowly back to the house. "Chris, who are you talking to?" "Harry." "Who's Harry?" "Harry." I couldn't get anything else out of her, so I just gave her some cake and milk and read to her until bedtime. As she listened, she stared out at the garden. Once she smiled and waved. It was a relief finally to tuck her in bed and know she was safe. When my husband Jim came home, I told him about the mysterious Harry. He laughed. "Oh, she started that lark, has she?" "What do you mean, Jim?" "It's not uncommon for an only child to have an imaginary companion. Some kids talk to their dolls. Chris has never been keen on her dolls. She has no brothers and sisters and no friends of her own age, so she imagines someone." "But why has she picked that particular name?" He shrugged. "You know how kids pick things up. I don't know what you're worrying about, honestly, I don't." "Nor do I, really. It's just that I feel extra responsible for her, more so than if I were her real mother." He looked at me. "I know, but she's all right. Chris is fine. She's a pretty, healthy, intelligent little girl. A credit to you. And to you. Yes, we're such thoroughly nice parents. And so modest." We laughed together, and he kissed me. I felt consoled. Until the next morning. Again, the sun shone brilliantly on the small lawn of the white roses. Christine sat in the grass, cross-legged, staring at the rose bush, smiling. "Hello, I'd hoped you would come, because I like you. How old are you?" "I'm only 5 and a piece." "I am not a baby. I'm going to school, and I shall have a new dress, a green one. Do you go to school?" "What do you do then?" She was silent for a while, nodding, listening, absorbed. I felt myself going cold as I stood there in the kitchen. I told myself, desperately, "Don't be silly. Lots of children have an imaginary companion. Just carry on as if nothing were happening. Don't listen. Don't be a fool." But I called Christine in earlier than usual for her mid-morning milk. Your milk's ready, Chris. Come along. In a minute. This was a strange reply. Usually she rushed in eagerly for her milk and the special sandwich cream biscuits which she loved. Come now, darling. Can Harry come too? No. The cry burst from me, harshly, surprising me. Looking toward the bush, she said, I'm sorry you can't come in, but I've got to have my milk. Then she turned and ran back to the house. Why can't Harry have some milk too? Who is Harry, darling? Harry's my brother. But Chris, you don't have a brother. Daddy and Mommy have only got one child, one little girl, that's you. So Harry can't be your brother. Harry's my brother. He says so. After she'd finished her milk and biscuits, I said, we'll go shopping now, Chris. You'd like to come to the shops with me, wouldn't you? I want to stay with Harry. Well, you can't. You're coming with me. Can Harry come too? No. My hands trembled as I put on my hat and gloves. It was chilly in the house nowadays, in spite of the, as if there were a cold shadow over it, in spite of the sun outside. Chris came with me meekly enough, but as we walked down the street, she turned and waved. I didn't mention any of this to Jim that night. I knew he'd only scoff as he'd done before. But when Christine's Harry fantasy went on day after day, it got more and more on my nerves. I came to hate those long summer days. I hoped for gray skies and rain. I longed for the white roses to wither and die. I trembled when I heard Christine's voice prattling away in the garden. She now talked without restraint to Harry. One Sunday, when Jim heard her in the garden going at it, he said, you know, I'm getting quite attached to young Harry. Wouldn't it be fun if one day we looked out and saw him? Don't say that. It's my nightmare, my waking nightmare. Oh, Jim, I can't bear it much longer. He was astonished. This Harry business is really getting you down, isn't it? Of course it is. Day in, day out, I hear nothing but Harry this, Harry that, Harry says, Harry thinks. Can Harry have some? Can Harry come too? It's fine for you out of the office all day, but I have to live with it. I'm afraid of it, Jim. It's so queer. He was thoughtful. You know what I think you should do to put your mind at rest? What? Take Christine along to see Dr. Webster tomorrow. Let him have a little talk with her. Do you think she's ill in her mind? Good heavens, no. But when we come across something that's a bit beyond us, it's as well to take professional advice. Next morning, I took Christine to see Dr. Webster. I left her in the waiting room while I told him briefly about Harry. He nodded sympathetically and then said, it's a fairly unusual case, Mrs. James, but by no means unique. I've had several cases of children who were whose imaginary companions were so real to them that their parents got the jitters. I imagine she's rather a lonely little girl, isn't she? Yes, she doesn't know any other children. We're new to the neighborhood, but that will change when she starts school. He added, and I think you'll find that when she goes to school and meets other children, these fantasies will disappear. You see, every child needs company of her own age. If she doesn't get it, she invents it. Older people who are lonely talk to themselves. That doesn't mean they're crazy, just that they need to talk to someone. A child is more practical. Seems silly to talk to oneself, she thinks. So she invents someone. I honestly think you have nothing to worry about. Yes, that's what my husband says. I'm sure he does. Still, you brought Christine here today. I'll have a chat with her. Please leave us alone together. I went to the waiting room to fetch Christine. She was standing at the window. Harry's waiting, she said. Where, Chris? I said, wanting suddenly to see with her eyes. There, by the rose bush. The doctor had a bush of white roses in his garden. There's no one there, I said. She looked at me with unchildlike scorn. With my voice shaking, I said, Dr. Webster wants to see you now, darling. You remember him, don't you? He gave you sweets after you had chicken pox. Yes, she said, and went willingly enough into the doctor's office. I waited restlessly. Through the wall, I heard their voices. I could hear the doctor chuckling and Christine laughing. She was talking away to the doctor in a way she didn't talk to me. When they came out, he said, nothing wrong with her whatsoever. She's just an imaginative little girl. A word of advice, Mrs. James. Let her talk about Harry. Let her become accustomed to confiding in you. I gather you've shown some disapproval of this brother of hers, so she doesn't talk much to you about him. He makes wooden toys, doesn't he, Chris? Yes, Harry makes wooden toys. And he can read and write, can't he? And swim and climb trees and paint pictures. Harry can do everything. He's a wonderful brother. Her little face flushed with adoration. The doctor patted me on the shoulder. Harry sounds a very nice brother for her. Then he smiled at Christine. And he's even got red hair like you, hasn't he, Chris? Yes, Harry has red hair, she said, proudly. Redder than mine. And he's nearly as tall as Daddy, only thinner. He's as tall as you, Mummy. He's 14. He says he's tall for his age. What is tall for his age? The doctor replied, Mommy will tell you about that as you walk home. Now, goodbye, Mrs. James. Don't worry, just let her prattle. Goodbye, Chris. Please give my love to Harry. He's there, she said, pointing to the doctor's garden. He's been waiting for me. Dr. Webster laughed. They're incorrigible, aren't they? I tried to be comforted by all of this, but I wasn't. I hoped sincerely that when Chris started school, this wretched Harry business would finish. Chris ran ahead of me. She looked up, as if looking at someone beside her. Then, for a dreadful moment, I saw a shadow on the pavement alongside her own. A long, thin shadow, like a boy's shadow. Then it was gone. I ran to catch up with her and held her hand tightly all the way home. Even in the comparative security of the house so strangely cold in this hot weather, I never let her out of my sight. On the face of it, she behaved no differently toward me. But in reality, she was drifting away. The child in my house was becoming a stranger. For the first time since Jim and I had adopted Christine, I wondered, seriously, who is she? Where does she come from? Who were her real parents? Who is the stranger I've taken as a daughter, this stranger whom I love? Who is Christine? Another week passed, and it was Harry all the time. The day before she was to start school, she said, "Not going to school." "You're going to school tomorrow, Chris. You're looking forward to it. You know you are. There'll be lots of other little girls and boys." "Harry says he can't come with me." I tried hard to follow the doctor's advice and appeared to believe in Harry. "You won't want Harry at school. He'll be too old. He'd feel silly among little boys and girls, a great lad of 14. "I want to be with Harry. I won't go to school without Harry." She began to weep loudly, painfully. "Chris, stop this nonsense. Stop it!" I struck her sharply on the arm. Her crying ceased immediately. She stared at me, her blue eyes wide open and frighteningly cold. She gave me an adult stare that made me tremble. Then she said, "You don't love me. Harry loves me. Harry wants me. He says I can go with him." "I will not hear any more of this," I shouted, hating the anger in my voice, hating myself for being angry at all with a little girl, my little girl, mine. I went down on one knee and held out my arms. "Chris, darling, come here." She came slowly. "I love you. I love you, Chris, and I'm real. School is real. Go to school to please me. Harry will go away if I do. You'll have other friends. I want Harry." More crying now, more tears wet on my shoulder. I held her closely. "You're tired, baby. Come to bed." She fell asleep with the tear stains still on her face. It was still daylight, and I went to her window to draw the curtain. There were golden shadows and long strips of sunshine in the garden. Then again, I saw the long, thin, clear-cut shadow of a boy near the white roses. I thought I saw a glimmer of red, like red curls on a boy's head. Then there was nothing. When I told Jim about Christine's emotional outburst, he said, "Poor little kid. Always a nervy business starting school. She'll be all right once she gets there. And you'll be hearing less about Harry as time goes on." "Harry doesn't want her to go to school." "Hey, it sounds as if you believe in Harry yourself." "Sometimes I do. Believing in evil spirits in your old age." He was teasing me, but his eyes were concerned. "I don't think Harry is evil," I said. "He's just a boy who doesn't exist, except for Christine." "And who is Christine?" "None of that," he said sharply. "When we adopted Christine, we agreed she was to be our own child. No probing into the past, no wondering or worrying, no mysteries. Christine is as much ours as if she'd been born of our flesh. Who is Christine indeed? She's our daughter, and just you remember that." "Yes, Jim, you're right. Of course, you're right." He was so fierce about it that I didn't tell him what I planned to do the next day while Chris was at school. The next morning, Chris was silent and sulking. Jim joked with her and tried to cheer her up, but all she would do was look out of the window and say, "Harry's gone." "You won't need Harry," said Jim. "You're going to school." She gave him that look of adult contempt she'd given me yesterday. She and I didn't speak as I took her to school. I was almost in tears. Although I was glad for her to start school, I felt a sense of loss at parting with her. I suppose every mother feels that when she takes her child to school for the first time. It's the end of babyhood for the child, and the beginning of life in reality. Life with its cruelty, its strangeness, its barbarity. I kissed her goodbye at the gate and said, "You'll be having lunch with other children at school, Chris. I'll call for you when school is over at 3 o'clock. "Yes, Mommy," she said, and held my hand tightly. Other nervous children were arriving with equally nervous parents. A pleasant young teacher in a white linen dress arrived at the gate, gathered the children together, and led them away. She gave me a sympathetic smile as she passed and said, "We'll take good care of her." I was quite light-hearted as I walked away, knowing that she was safe and that I didn't need to worry. Then I started on my secret mission. I took a bus to town and went to the old gaunt building I hadn't visited for over 5 years. Then Jim and I had gone together. The top floor of the building belonged to the Graythorn Adoption Society. I climbed the 4 flights and knocked on the familiar door with the scratched paint. A secretary whose face I didn't know let me in. May I speak with Miss Cleaver? My name is Mrs. James. Have you an appointment? No, but it's very important. I'll see. She went out for a moment and then returned. Miss Cleaver will see you, Mrs. James. Miss Cleaver was a tall, gray-haired woman with a charming smile, a kindly face, and a very wrinkled brow. She rose to meet me. Mrs. James, how good to see you again. How's Christine? She's very well. Miss Cleaver, I'd better get straight to the point. I know you don't normally divulge the origin of a child to its adopters, and vice versa, but I must know who Christine is. Sorry, Mrs. James, our rules forbid it. Please let me tell you the whole story. Then you'll see I'm not just asking out of vulgar curiosity. Very well. I told her about Harry. When I'd finished, she said, "It's very queer indeed. Mrs. James, I'm going to break my rule for once. I'm going to tell you in strict confidence where Christine came from. She was born in a very poor part of London. There were 4 in the family, father, mother, son, and Christine herself. A son? Yes, he was 14 when it happened. When what happened? Let me start at the beginning. The parents hadn't really wanted Christine. The family lived in one room at the top of an old house, which in my opinion should have been condemned by the sanitary inspector. It was difficult enough when there were only 3 of them, but with a baby as well, life became a nightmare. The mother was a neurotic creature, unhappy, untidy, overweight. After she'd had the baby, she took no interest in it. The son, however, adored the little girl right from the start. He got into trouble for cutting school so he could look after her. The father had a steady job in a warehouse. Not much money, but enough to keep them alive. Then he was sick for several weeks and lost his job. He was laid up in that messy room, ill, worried, nagged by his wife, irked by the baby's crying and his son's eternal fussing over the child. I got all these details from neighbors afterwards, by the way. I was also told that he had quite a bad time in the war. After his demobilization, he was in a nerve hospital for several months before he was fit to come home at all. Finally, it all proved too much for him. One morning, in the early hours, a woman in a ground floor room saw something fall past her window and heard a thud on the ground. She went outside to look. The son of the family was there on the ground. Christine was in his arms. The boy's neck was broken. He was dead. Christine was blue in the face, but still breathing faintly. The woman woke the household, called for the police and the doctor. Then they went to the upstairs room. They had to break down the door. It was locked and sealed inside. An overpowering smell of gas greeted them in spite of the open window. They found husband and wife dead in their bed, along with a note from the husband saying, "I can't go on anymore. I'm going to kill them all. It's the only way." The police concluded that he must have sealed up the door and windows and turned on the gas while his family was still asleep. Then he lay beside his wife until he passed into unconsciousness and then death. But the boy must have wakened. Perhaps he struggled with the door but couldn't open. He would have been too weak to shout. All he could do was pluck away the seals from the window, open it, and fling himself out, holding his adored little sister tightly in his arms. Why Christine herself wasn't gassed is rather a mystery. Perhaps her face was right under the bedclothes, pressed against her brother's chest. They always slept together. Anyway, Christine was taken to hospital, and then to the home where you and Mr. James first saw her. And a lucky day that was for little Christine. Miss Cleaver paused, and I said, "So her brother saved her life and died himself?" "Yes. He was a very brave young man." "Miss Cleaver, what was his name?" "I'll have to look that up for you." She referred to one of her many files and then said at last, "The family's name was Jones, and the 14-year-old brother was called Harold." "And did he have red hair?" "That I don't know, Mrs. James." "But it's Harry. The boy was Harry. What does it mean? I can't understand it." She replied, "It's not easy to understand, but perhaps in her subconscious mind, Christine has always remembered Harry, her babyhood companion. We don't think of children as having much memory, but there must be images of the past tucked away somewhere in their little heads. Christine doesn't invent this Harry. She remembers him so clearly that he becomes real for her. I know it sounds far-fetched, but the whole story is so odd. I can't think of any other explanation." "Miss Cleaver, would you give me the address of the house where they lived?" She was reluctant to give me this information, but I persuaded her. Then I set out to find number 13 Canver Row, where the man Jones had tried to kill himself and his whole family and almost succeeded. I soon found the house. It looked deserted. It was filthy and derelict. But one thing made me stare and stare. There was a tiny garden with a bush of white roses. They bloomed gloriously. Their scent was overpowering. I stood by the rose bush and stared up at the top window. Then I was startled by a voice. "What are you doing here?" There was an old woman peering through the ground floor window. "I thought the house was empty." "Should be. Been condemned. But they can't get me out. Won't nowhere else to go. Won't go. The others went quickly enough after it happened. No one else wants to come. They say the place is haunted. So it is. But what's the fuss about? Life and death, they're very close. You get to know that when you're old. Alive or dead, what's the difference?" She stared at me with yellowish, bloodshot eyes. "I saw him fall past my window. That's where he fell, among the roses. He still comes back. I see him. He won't go away until he gets her." Who are you talking about?" "Harry Jones. Nice boy he was. Red hair. Very thin. Too determined, though. Always got his own way. Loved Christine too much, I thought. Used to sit down here with her for hours by the roses. Then died there." "Go away. This place is not for you. It's for the dead who aren't dead, and the living who aren't alive. Am I alive or dead? You tell me. I don't know." She frightened me, staring at me with those crazy eyes beneath the white matted hair. "I'll go now," I murmured. And I quickly ran through the streets. The sun blazed down on my head, but I was hardly aware of it. I lost all sense of time and place as I stumbled on. Then I heard something that chilled my blood. Somewhere a clock struck 3. At 3 o'clock, I was supposed to be at the school gates, waiting for Christine. Where was I? What bus should I take? I frantically asked passers-by. They looked at me fearfully, just as I looked at the old woman. They must have thought I was crazy. At last I caught the right bus, and sick with dust, petrol fumes, and fear, I reached the school. I ran across the hot, empty playground. In a classroom, the young teacher in white was gathering her books together. "I'm here for Christine James. I'm her mother. I'm so sorry I'm late." "Where is she?" The young woman frowned. "Christine James." Then she said brightly, "Oh yes, I remember. The pretty little red-haired girl. It's all right, Mrs. James. Her brother came round for her." How alike they are, aren't they? And so devoted. It's rather sweet to see a boy of that age so fond of his baby sister. "Has your husband got red hair like the 2 children?" I almost fainted. "What did her brother say?" "He didn't say anything. When I spoke to him, he just smiled. They'll be home by now, I should think. I say, do you feel all right?" "Yes, thank you. I must get home." I rushed out of the classroom and ran all the way home through the burning streets. "Chris, Christine, where are you? Chris! Chris!" Even now, I hear my own voice of the past, screaming through the cold house. "Christine! Chris! Where are you? Answer me! Chris! Harry! Don't take her away! Harry, come back! Harry!" Demented, I ran out into the garden. The sun struck me like a hot blade. The white roses glared at me. The air was so thin that I seemed to stand in timelessness, placelessness. For a moment, I felt very close to Christine, though I couldn't see her. Then the roses danced before my eyes and turned red. The world turned red. I fell through redness to blackness to darkness to nothingness and collapsed in the garden. For weeks, I was in bed with sunstroke, which turned to fever. During this time, Jim and the police searched in vain for Christine. The futile search continued for months. The papers were full of the strange disappearance of the red-haired girl. The teacher described the brother who'd come round for her. There were newspaper stories of kidnapping, baby snatching, and child murders. Then it all died down. Just another unsolved mystery in police files. And only 2 people knew what had really happened. An old, crazed woman living in a derelict house, and myself. Years have passed, but I walk in fear. Such ordinary things make me afraid. Sunshine, sharp shadows on grass, white roses, children with red hair, and the name Harry. Such an ordinary